Hi, my name is Nicholas, and this is a channel about my progress to review and edit a novel I've been working on for several years called The Mythology of Ariel and the Corruption of the Stars. I will be going through segment by segment as I feel if I find a good stopping place, I'll just go ahead and stop in the middle of a chapter because I will be reviewing and editing as I see those edits, things that pop out, to catalog for myself what I did and why I did them. General, reviews and edits as far as grammar will pop up, but those things are less of a concern. It's more so honing the actual writing of things to make things more clear, or if there are repetitive words and things, just to nail down the style of the work. The first chapter is called A Dishonorable Gift, and I plan on changing this because I've had a beta reader, and for anybody who doesn't know what that is, a beta reader is somebody who will read somebody's work, and there are varying degrees of review that a beta reader will give a writer, anywhere from a general overview of the entire book as a whole, or chapter by chapter impressions. And I had a beta reader inform me that he felt my chapters were very, not necessarily unfocused in the sense of the narrative, but I had a lot of scenes in one chapter, especially my earlier chapters, that didn't really, it sort of broke the flow for him, I guess. And he suggested that if I just broke up my chapters into smaller segments and found a proper ending, because I have scene breaks within chapters that are indicated by, a symbol between paragraphs, to give the impression of a passage of time or a very distinct scene break. And he suggested that I could just end chapters in those spots, and I would have a much better flow of the narrative. I guess for him and for other people like him, really, really long chapters kind of put him off. I personally don't mind really long chapters, but I do have really long chapters and really short chapters. And when I say really short, I mean shorter in comparison, very much so in comparison to my longer chapters. The short chapters, he felt, this beta reader, he felt that they were much more succinct and they had a much more decent size, at least as far as what he preferred. So I will be changing the name of this chapter more than likely because there is a point at which I will likely break this first chapter up into two. There is a very obvious place that he pointed out that I could break them up, and I tend to agree, at least with this first chapter. The middle section, actually, there's like a halfway point in this chapter. I could easily just break it up into two. So anyway, I will be changing the name of the chapter, of the first chapter, and obviously I'll have to come up with a name for the second chapter. So anyway, the first paragraph. Ryland stood looking to the south, unyielding as the stone beneath her sandaled feet. She awaited the return of Agono of Ariel, who was due to return that day from a test, as his forefathers had done and was now expected of him. But there were some who had never returned. Now in this first paragraph, I've used the word return and variations of the word return a lot. I've used it 3 times, 2 in one sentence. So one thing I'm going to need to do is try and break up that repetition, changing a word or even all of them, and keeping one of the returns. So this first sentence where it shows up, she awaited the return of Agono of Ariel, who was due to return that day from his test. I will be changing the first return to arrival. She awaited the arrival of Agono of Ariel. Now, I'm not fully impressed by that because there are a lot of words that start with A, and it may be seen as a nitpicky thing, but that's a lot of that sound in the first part. Some people might think that that has a nice sound, but I'll go ahead and read it again out loud to see how I feel about it. She awaited the arrival of Agono of Ameriel, who was due to return that day from his test. So I guess it kind of has a bit of a nice sort of flow to it. It's not distracting necessarily. I guess maybe I'm looking for something that may or may not be a problem. So, she awaited the arrival of Agono of Ameriel, who was due to return that day from his test, as his forefathers had done and was now expected of him. But there were some who had never returned. Now, I want to change this last returned. So, I will look into the thesaurus just to see if there's anything that pops up. You know, never use the thesaurus to make yourself look like a better writer than you are. You don't want to just throw in fancy words just to fancy up your writing. That's when you start to get purple prose and just generally pretentious sounding writing. The thesaurus is very good for situations like this, where you have repetition, and you know, I probably wrote this at a very sort of free, roaming sort of thought process, just laying out these sentences, and didn't realize that I had used the word 3 times. So using the thesaurus is not a cheap thing here. It is really just to help me explore what is the better use of a word, or what word could be better used in this spot. So the sentence reads, "But there were some who had never returned." Now, when I type return into my thesaurus, I have various delineations, I think is the word, delineations of the word return, subdivisions, if you will, such as go back, homecoming, give back, put back, profit. Right off the bat, profit, put back, give back, those don't work here. Those are referring to different meanings of return than what I need. So homecoming, maybe. Homecoming, arrival, no. Go back, come back, revisit, go again, come again. None of those really work here. And so the thesaurus has already proven itself to not be a fix-all, which is good, because you never want to rely on a thesaurus. So I will probably have to revisit this at a later time, just because the double use of a word isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's really just whether or not it's distracting. So I will read the paragraph one more time and then move on. Ryland stood looking to the south, unyielding as the stone beneath her sandaled feet. She awaited the arrival of Agono of Ameriel, who was due to return that day from his test, as his forefathers had done and was now expected of him. But there were some who had never returned. It's not so bad. Okay, next paragraph. She picked her gown of finely woven and bright cloth to wear, made for the daytime, and unique and rare shells jangled from about her waist like softly chiming bells. Now, the shells and bells, I actually like how they rhyme. It was unintentional. It is merely a coincidence that happened. I have no issue with this paragraph. It doesn't really bother me, any of the flow or the prose of it. So I'll move on. He was fond of that sound. A string of many tiny pearls hung from her clenched hands. These were his first gift to her, but she did not put them on just yet. A salty breeze swept gently across the top of the walls from the east, and she found it calming as always. Her yellow hair fluttered across her innocent blue eyes, and she quickly brushed it away. I feel like I could word this better. I referred to her hair as it, and it is just boring. So what I'm thinking is, her yellow hair fluttered across her innocent blue eyes. It's the first part of the sentence. I should perhaps consider referring to actual strands. So if I type in strands of her yellow hair fluttered across her innocent blue eyes, and she quickly brushed them away. Because we're no longer referring to a singular thing, you know, collectively her hair. We're referring to strands of her hair that are going across her face. So change that to them. We will reread. Strands of her yellow hair fluttered across her innocent blue eyes, and she quickly brushed them away, her gaze persistent in the effort to patrol the borders of the forest beyond the Great Wall. So, what do we have here? We have a young woman who is standing upon the top of a wall, and she's waiting for somebody. And we get the impression from the salty breeze that she's near the ocean. So, immediately, you know, we have a sort of vague sense of her being upon the top of a wall in what we would assume is either a fortress or perhaps a city. I don't like distracting descriptions of scenes or people. I would prefer, if always, to write in my descriptions of people and descriptions in ways that have to do with directly with the narrative. So right now, what's important is that she is waiting for somebody. When her hair flutters across her face, it's like a distraction. So she brushes them away because she's wanting to keep her eyes focused on the borders of a forest. Because, you know, the man who's to return, Agono, will be coming, you know, through that border of that forest, and she's waiting for him, and she wants to be the first one that he sees. So I've given some vague descriptions, and it is consistent with the narrative. There will be more descriptions, but they'll be worked in as I feel they can be worked in. So, moving on to the next paragraph. She knew he was out there somewhere in the great forest of the realm, but sometime that day he was expected to return from a year of trials in the lonely crater called Cell. Now, we have a bit of a redundancy with the idea of him returning, but there's more told in this redundancy, so it is not a complete redundancy. It's more of the setup of the idea of where he had been. So I don't really feel that is a problem necessarily, but if I can readdress this later on in a second edit of the novel, that would be something that is more of a fine-tuning thing that isn't necessarily a problem, so I'm going to move on. There were a few maps available for her to peruse when watchful eyes were not so watchful, and any that she might be brave enough to attain detailed lands much further than the extent of the small realm of Ergilios. There were treacherous places in the south, and as long as he was outside the gate, he might as well have been wandering the Rift March. Now, with this sentence, what do we have? We have her worrying. Apparently this trial is fairly dangerous, or at least it is something that will test him in a way that is perhaps life-threatening. Otherwise, she would not be so, you know, persistent to be waiting for his return. Because if it was just a regular test of somebody's honor or something that is expected of him, you know, it may not be as much of an issue as far as worry is concerned. But one thing I wanted to point out here was there were treacherous places in the south. So she's referring to the south. Now, this would imply that she's in the north. Now, there will be a map to accompany this this book. And obviously maps are great for, you know, for being able to look and see where things are happening when you are reading through something. But when you're reading through something, you don't want to be distracted by location necessarily. You want to be able to imagine it in your head. So giving very blatant and basically treating the reader as if they are stupid is something that I don't like as a reader. And as a writer, I trust that my reader will be intelligent enough to understand what I'm doing. So by referring to the South and referring to the treacherous places of the South, as well as the idea of what's called the Rift March, gives the impression of more dangerous realms to the South, and she lives in the safety of the North. Also, it's implied that he might as well have been wandering in the Rift March. He's not as far as the Rift March. He's not gone that far. He's likely been in solitude, but not so far as those treacherous places. It's just that her worry makes her think that he might as well be in as much danger as somebody who is in the Rift March, whatever that is. We don't know what that is yet as a reader, which we assume will be referenced, or perhaps will actually be a location later in the novel. So, moving on. She earnestly believed that he was on his way home, but oftentimes others of lesser blood would come back before their obligation was fulfilled, if they came back at all. She knew him well enough, and he would fight not to bring such shame to his house. There is nothing really there that I feel pops up. Perhaps there would be a better way to phrase some of those sentences, but again, that's fine-tuning. A lot of times you can rearrange words, and that, just testing things, just throwing some different combinations of phrases together, and you might come up with something that's a bit more pleasant to the ear. However, I don't see that as being any issue here. She had risen from bed after a long night of forced sleep, and when she did get up, it was early, and her conscious thoughts were at once on Agono, as they had been in her many dreams. Okay, so she's been worrying a lot. This is, again, driving home the fact that she's very impatient. She obviously cares very deeply about this man. Moving on. She had rushed to make herself ready without the hassle and properness of a handmaid to tie every string and brush every hair. Her smile carried over from dreaming into waking, and treasured memories drove her to abandon royal etiquette. She slipped away from her family's house at the top of the summit of Koroneth. The guards were always very courteous to her, and they let her by, promising to keep quiet as long as one of them were allowed to accompany her. She reluctantly agreed. There was no one to be seen on the many balconies of the house, and otherwise she managed to slip away unnoticed. So basically, what's going on here is she woke up in the morning. We've gone back in time just a little bit, just to give an impression of where she's been. She's thinking, obviously, on the wall. We know where she is on the wall in present time, but we've gone back a little bit just to show what her mood has been up to this point, and to give an impression of what the mood is. This technique is not always the best technique to use, because it can be confusing as far as timelines, but we only have two basic things going on here. We were introduced to her on the wall, and now the paragraph has very obviously, in my opinion, just gone back to when she woke up, and we're assuming that, this is just the two important things: what her mindset was before she came to the wall, and that will help us to understand where she's at mentally at the wall. And then moving on. She knew it would be some time, but she wanted to be there for Agono when he returned. She recognized she may have been hasty, but she was content to have left a note stating her intentions for her handmaiden, who also happened to be a dear and trusted friend whom she trusted not to tell. Repetition, again. The word trust, used in the same sentence. Now, we're going to try using the thesaurus, just real quickly. So what do we have? I'm looking for a verb or a noun, depending on which one of the ones I want to replace. Who also happened to be a dear and trusted friend. Reliable, I believe, would be a very good replacement. Reliable or relied on. So there are two options here. Who also happened to be a dear and trusted friend whom she relied on not to tell, or who also happened to be a dear and reliable friend whom she trusted not to tell. I prefer the latter. Alright, moving on. Then she leapt to walk through the city to the southern gate. Alright, now the gate. It is a southern gate. She's looking to the south when she stands on the gate. Next paragraph. Dendium was a vast city set upon a finger of land that pointed thickly and upward to the cliffs at the shores of the circling sea. So what we have, obviously with a map it would be easier to understand, the description of the location, but basically we have a city that has been built on a peninsula, and at the tip of the peninsula there are cliffs. And as it's described, it's a finger of land. It is like imagining a finger. It is a long peninsula, and the city is built upon this peninsula. How far into the landmass is undetermined at this point, if it's even really that important at all. And we have a description of the sea. We have the name for it. It is the circling sea. And there's a reason for that, why it's called that, but that will be addressed later on. It was covered for many miles with great manors and towers of white stone built upon many great hills, and the people often referred to these houses as summits. Okay, so earlier we read that the place that she had woken up from and left was also a house, but it was something referred to as a summit. Here we have the reason why it's called a summit. It is the vernacular of the people. They refer to them as summits because they're essentially like houses that are built upon each other, sometimes with a tower on the top. Those are the more wealthy manors of the city. So, moving on. It was covered for many miles with great manors and towers of white stone built upon many great hills, and the people often referred to those houses as summits. 3 of these in particular were built around a large slowly sloping hill, where the wide road snaked up and around to the top, where a massive tower sat at the top. Again, repetition. So, I don't even think that I need the very last at the top. I can just leave it with where a massive tower sat. So just literally going to delete that. That was redundant. It wasn't even necessarily something that was needed. That place was known in all the lands as the Jagged Pearl, and to the people of Dendium, the Israthale, for it was white as an oyster's treasure, and many little towers rested upon its side like teeth. Now, what I'm implying here is an actual word of the language that these people speak. Obviously, for purposes of somebody who's an English reader, or purposes for somebody who's a Spanish speaker, or German, or any of language that this would be translated into, you're reading it in that language. But for the sense of realism and immersiveness, these people do speak their own language, so they don't speak English. So any plot points that would rely on English is something that wouldn't make sense, because these people aren't actually speaking English. So this tower is called the Israthale, and when I say for it was white as an oyster's treasure, and many little towers rested upon its side like teeth, Israthale is probably a term that arose from the combination of their word for an oyster's treasure, a pearl, and little towers resting upon its side like teeth, jagged. It is white as a pearl, and it is jagged, with many towers rising up the side of it. So that is just how they came to call it. Morning light was the best time to see the city. The fog of dawn rolled about the hills and through the streets with a ghostly splendor. Rylan loved it dearly, and never would she think to leave Dendium. It pained her that Agono had to, for she knew that he loved his home as much as she did. So they both have a love for their home. Obviously that's not what relationships are built on, but it's something that they both have a dedication to a life with certainty. And home is something that has a certainty to it. When you think about your home, and you think about, especially when you're talking about your family, home is something that, you know, we all want to be a constant. And so we sort of have an idea that these are two people that they want a sense of consistency, and home is supposed to be consistent. So the morning watch opened the south gate, and more weary travelers came barreling in with their families and most precious belongings. The stables began to stink of dung, with so many horses kept there. It was the third or perhaps fourth time that people from the south had come to the front gates of Dendium requesting solace, bringing terrible stories with them of marauders that had destroyed or taken their farmland homes. So, this is basically setting up something that will be an issue later in the book. These people are coming from the south. We've already established that the south is a more dangerous realm. These people, having come from the south, are obviously seeking solace in the north, and this is the northernmost kingdom, and it has safety. These people are seeking safe haven from something that is going on in the south. It's talking about marauders destroying or taking their farmland homes. So why this has become such a problem is yet to be seen. Obviously, with a map, you will be able to see that there are other kingdoms in the south. So why aren't these kingdoms dealing with this? Why are they not able to? This is something that will present itself as more of an issue later on. She watched them closely as they passed below through the gate. Their humble and foreign cloth was ragged and torn, thick as it was, and their bones seemed to protrude all the more in those ragged furs. Other kingdoms of the south would not let them pass through their walls, saying that they had need to look after their own. It seemed unreasonable to most, and the burden then fell to the peoples of Ergilios to shelter them, for there was nowhere further to flee than the city of the northern shore. So, pretty much what I just said. This is the realm or kingdom that is on the northernmost shore. There's nowhere further to go than this. And apparently all the other realms of the south, all the other towns, people, they are all saying, no, you have to move on. We need to look after our own. We can't shelter you. So apparently whatever is happening is likely happening very far into the south. And this is something that is trickling upward to the north. And people are just unable to stop anywhere and to seek solace, which will be obviously addressed further on in the book. So this is setting up something that will be addressed later on in the book, but for the purpose of mentioning it right now, this is something that Ryland is witnessing, and it is feeding into her worry, because obviously somebody she cares about deeply is outside of the walls, and some of these people are likely coming from nearby towns, and maybe even from inside the realm of Ergilios, which is referred to in passing. It is the realm of which Dendium is the capital. So, moving on. So they settled in Dendium, the greatest city of men and Tirali, the Grey Folk. Now, that is another race, mentioned just in passing. It's just, they're the Grey Folk. That is a common description of the people. They will be obviously very present, but this is the greatest city of men and Tirali. This is a city in which men and Tirali coexist. And political issues will be present in the book. I didn't want politics to be the focus of the book, as a lot of fantasy tends to focus on politics very heavily. This book, its purpose, requires a degree of political attention, but it is not the focus. So there will be issues between these two races in the sense of racial tension, but it is more so a backdrop than a plot device that drives the narrative. The travelers were escorted by the city's sentinels to houses nearest to the ports far down the cliff wall by the water. The cliff wall is a cliff that is like a wall. It's if you can imagine a peninsula going to the shore with cliffs, they can go down the cliff, and there's houses built down the cliff. They've probably created ramps that go all the way down the cliff, many ramps and everything, going down to a shore where obviously docks would be. Moving on. These were the unwanted places of Dendium, where few came to dwell but lowlifes and ruffians. But there was little else that could be done. So even Ergilios, as generous as apparently they are, they themselves still don't have much else to offer except basically their slums. And even the townsfolk, they don't want to be in the slums. But there's really just nowhere else for these people to be housed. Obviously, we can assume that some of the towns or the people of the city of Dendium probably open up their houses to these people. But as a generality, these people, the government of Ergilios is required to put them here, just merely out of necessity. There was talk in the city of a spreading darkness in the farthest realms of the south, where folks' shadows were long. This is basically just a way of implying that there is a lot in this book about darkness. Not just the sense of, dark times or a dark sort of like mood to the book, although there is. It is also, in a literal sense, a dark world, especially in the south, as you will see further on. So this sort of like imagery is, referring to where folks' shadows were long. That is a literal thing. The sun's light is unable to, the sun itself does not actually pass over the world in the same way that it would the earth. So these people are further away from the sun, so it's probably colder in the south. Although that is not directly referenced here, it is. Everyone knew that the keepers were in deep discussions of there regarding the matter. See, now this is a sentence that actually needs some work for it to even be comprehensible. So everyone knew that the keepers were in deep discussions of their own, just put that in real quick, of their own regarding the matter. Stragglers passed through the gate now and again as the day wore on, and a few caravans set up their tents just beyond the walls, since some of the city's merchants would come and trade with them. Not all sought the generosity of Dendium, just their coin, whether out of fear or dislike of its people. So, perhaps the people of Ergilios are not necessarily respected or even liked by other people outside their realm. This is actually the case, as you will find out later, and this is sort of implying that these people are here out of necessity. They don't even want to be here. So whatever's driving them, they would much rather live in their own realms, because this place, for whatever reason, does not merit their respect, at least in their eye. These people who are coming to Dendium. So moving on. The sun sank far in the west, as it had always done behind the circling seas, and the south gate was shut. Great bells sounded across the many summits. So it's nighttime. She has waited all day. Rylan has waited all day, and she has seen people come into the city, set up, essentially like a tent city outside the walls, and now there's essentially a ringing out of bells across the many summits. Which we can probably just assume is, a signal of nighttime, and maybe, to call in people to their houses, basically, or also signifying the change of the city watch, because with many new people in the city, and the city getting crowded and more crowded as the days go on, crime could be an issue, and there might even be a curfew. These bells could signify a curfew. But it's not enough of a plot point to really just drag out and explain. It is background, because right now what is really the focus of what's going on here is what is Rylan doing on the wall? Who is this Agono? When is he coming back? Why was he gone? And what is the nature of their relationship? So, moving on. It was in fact the end of a year. The night became alive with laughter and merriment. It was no coincidence that Rylan should be waiting for Agono to return, for on that day a year prior he had left. Rylan was starting to become uneasy, though, and her thoughts clouded with uncertainty. She could not think on the worst. She did not know if she could bear it. To her relief, she felt the presence of a friend come to her side. So, basically we have celebrations. It's apparently the new year. And a year prior, Agono had left. So he's been gone for a year. And he is due to return after a year's time. And the fact that she is waiting on the wall very impatiently, apparently, because if she came there at the very beginning of the day expecting him to come back that day or that morning even, or even at any point during that day, would imply that he's at least close enough that she would have hope that he would. Because if he's supposed to be gone for a whole year, as it is implied that he has been gone for a year, the idea is that he probably keeps a count of days, and then after a year's time has passed, he returns upon the new year. So he must be close enough that a day's journey would be enough to get him home. So, moving on. He was a tall and somber man with a clean beard and a stark gaze. He wore the raiment of a keeper, with the tail of his long black cape brushing against the stone, and she noted that he must have just come from the deep hall, the throne room of the three keepers. His name was Voracos of Ameriel, and his duty was to sit upon the throne of war. He was Agono's father. Now, there is a lot of information in just this one paragraph. We've had clarification of a system of government, which has not been detailed here, but we have references to titles. The idea of a keeper. And Voracos of Ameriel is the keeper of the throne of war. As you'll see later on, the title of keeper is something that is respected in the realm of Ergilios. It is definitely the ruling seats, as you'll find out later how many there are. But apparently Agono is the son of a ruler. The nature of this government will be clarified later on, but there we have it. And also the reference to the deep hall, which is, as it's referred to as the throne room of the three keepers. It says how many keepers there are in that paragraph. There are three keepers. He put an old hand upon the worn parapet and leaned forward to look upon her face. Her eyes were reddened with worry. Reddened from worry. I want to change the word upon. It was used twice. So he put an old hand upon the worn parapet and leaned forward to look upon her face. To look at her face, or to look on her face? To look at her face might be the better approach here. Have you waited all day? If anyone has seen you, they will assuredly presume something, especially at this hour. So you might as well wear those pearls my son gave to you, said he. She was silent at first, but a quick twitch upon the edge of her lips reassured him. So, apparently, he is aware of their relationship, and by implying, if anyone has seen you, they will assuredly presume something. This implies that maybe their relationship is not something that is looked kindly upon in the eyes of certain parties. He is the son of a keeper. We don't know who she is. She has pearls, but he gave them to her. So, could this be a mistress? Could this be somebody that is also the lineage of one of the other keepers, perhaps, or maybe just a noble or something? We've already had reference to people of lesser blood, so lineage and a general sense of class systemology it has been referenced already, and Agono is somebody who we are probably to assume is of what would be referred to as higher blood. So he is somebody who maybe has just a higher pedigree in the eyes of the people of this city, which may or may not have to do with why other realms don't respect them, or some people don't respect them. So we don't really know what's going on here, but apparently the father he does not have any problem with this, because he just tells her, you might as well just wear those pearls that my son gave to you, because you're not fooling anybody. Okay, moving on. Would it not be unwise to attract such attention, my lord? Said Rylan. So she obviously respects his stature as a keeper. You mean more than you already have, sweet girl? Said Voracos. And he laughed warmly as he tenderly took the pearls from her and put them in their proper place. He looked at her carefully with a considerate eye, and said, has anyone come to take you from the wall, Rylan? So, their relationship seems to be very good. He knows about their relationship, and at this point, we could probably assume that it is a love interest between Rylan and Agono. And the father knows about this love interest, and he condones it. He has no issue with it, and we are getting a look at a side of Voracos that is very tender. He is a kind man, and to take the pearls and put them in their proper place is a sign of just he's considerate. Even though he asks, has anyone come to take you away from the wall? Which would imply there are people who would want to take her away. Those certain people that may not condone the relationship. Moving on. Has anyone come to take you from the wall, Rylan? No, and I would not let them if they had. Let them say what they will. I do not know why I've tried to conceal my love for him. That is to say, I have some notion, said Rylan, and she was fidgety with her necklace. She did not move her gaze from the forest as she continued. Your son has not returned yet, my lord, and the day is almost finished. It has already finished, but he is permitted to enter at any time now. He is returning as we speak, said Voracos. But his reassurance did not seem to lift any worry from his own soul, though he made a decent effort to hide it. It is a long walk from the earth wound to our gates. He will be weary, my dear, but he was determined to see this trial done. So, basically, what's going on here is they're both worried. He obviously has a responsibility to not be consumed by worry. She does not have that responsibility. So, being a love interest to this character Agono, that love and her care for his well-being and his safety is something that obviously very much so worries her. So we can assume that these people really do care about each other. They've known about their feelings for each other for a long time. We still don't know if they're married. We can assume they aren't, because why would anybody think they have the right to take her away from the wall if she is his wife? So we can probably assume that they're not married. And also, there is a reference of a long walk from the earth wound to our gates. as Vorokos says. He will be weary, but he was determined to see this trial done. So, he has apparently spent a year in something called an earth wound, and it is a long walk, presumably an entire day, because Vorokos is now at the wall. It's very late into the day, and he probably is consumed by anticipation as well, just as she was. She was just a bit more impatient than him, and he understood that not only does he have responsibilities, more than likely, day-to-day responsibilities as a ruling keeper of the city, but he knew that he wasn't going to see his son until very, very late in the day, if that day at all. He may actually be just as impatient as her, but his knowledge of the situation and the idea of this trial probably prevents him from being impatient to the point of waiting at the wall all day. Because, as it was referenced earlier, this trial is something that Ogono and all his forefathers have had to go through. So, obviously, Vorokos, his father, has gone through this trial, so he has an intimate knowledge of it. Moving on. She sighed and said, "I hope you do not take offense, my lord, but I have wished often that he was not your only son, and thus not the only heir to the throne." Now, I said not, but the thing is, it wasn't in here, so I'm going to add that. And thus not the only heir to the throne. So, to reread it. "I hope you do not take offense, my lord, but I have often wished that he was not your only son, and thus not the only heir to the throne, so he would never have left at all. I do not think he would have gone unless he felt he had to." So, Ogono is an only child, and because of that, he is the only heir to the throne. So, we have a bit more of a clear understanding of what these keepers are. They are obviously not elected officials. There is not a democratic process to this government system. However, it is not a sole monarchy. There is not one ruling family. It would seem that there were three, and Ogono is one of the three ruling families, and this trial, perhaps with it being referred to as a trial, is like a rite of passage. He is forced to go through this trial, being the fact that he is a only child, because he is heir to the throne. Vorokos smiled and stroked his long graying beard. His aged face was a comforting one then, though Rylan had never known him to show another to know a difference. Again, repetition of words. So, the phrase, "though Rylan had never known him to show another to know the difference." You can just change know, the second know, to see. To see a difference. Had never known him to show another to see a difference. It is a thing that has always been done, and the firstborn of our house has often returned, more than often. He may be my only son, and it may have been my duty to have more sons, but he is strong, perhaps stronger than all those who dwell in this city. So, Vorokos, he is confident in his son's potential. His son is apparently very good at what he does as far as training, because Vorokos is a keeper of the seat of war. And we don't know if these people are in peacetime or wartime, but apparently Vorokos is somebody who handles the affairs of war. And Ogono obviously, would be trained to know what war is like, or how to handle war as a leader. That isn't to say that anybody who inherits that responsibility in a monarchy would be good at it. In fact, I think there are even issues that arise later in the novel that sort of address that idea. But again, it's not a major focus of the narrative. But from what we can see here, Ogono is adept. He is prepared, and his father believes in his son. So, moving on. But the creature that resides around the earth wound is most terrible, is it not? It grows later and later, my lord. But I am sorry, I should not speak in such ways. Agono told me I would fret too much, said Rylan. So, there's a creature, apparently, that lives around the earth wound. This is probably why the trial was put here. This apparently is a test of endurance and survival. He is meant to become somebody who endures persecution, which would imply that the people of this city and of this realm view the seat of war as a seat that is better suited to have somebody who can endure persecution to sit upon it. The mentality of somebody who isn't just more relaxed and more willing to take surrender as a serious option to persist and to endure is a quality that they prefer in the keeper of the seat of war. It is in everyone's nature to worry over such things. You are not alone, said Vorkos, his face becoming somber with worn lines appearing around his eyes, for he too wondered upon occasion throughout the year past if fate had already taken his son, despite his abounding potential. Again, a reference to his abounding potential, and even he is worried. This trial is not easy. There is definitely it is quite a test, and it is something that, as was referred to earlier, could even force people, as it was referred to, people of lesser blood to abandon it. Now, that might mean that others that are not keepers have undertaken the trial. I believe it is referenced. This is more of a background sort of thing, more of a lore sort of thing, but the idea of the keepers is that the seat can be challenged. Other people can assume the seat of war or the other two seats, which will be named and referenced later. So Agono is still somebody of higher blood, and people probably just trust that people of higher blood are going to be able to endure the trial. But it could be said that people of higher blood it is not a title necessarily of an inherent better quality of an individual, but it could be somebody who has proven themselves to be somebody of higher blood. So not a caste system necessarily, but somebody who is of a family that has shown themselves to be a very responsible and respected family. So the title of higher blood, when referenced to certain people, is probably, at least in the original intent of the phrase, is to reference somebody who has shown themselves to be of a higher quality of a human being, or of an individual, and that them and their family are just better people. They seek to be better people. They're not just inherently better people than others. But anyway, moving on. All who care for him have been troubled many times, my dear. However, your anxiety is a different kind, I will admit. So Vorkos is very understanding of the fact that she's in love with Agono. And that kind of anxiety is something that is a bit more blinding, because it's not, because there being different types of love. Obviously there's a father and son love. The father and son love, it's not that he cares or is less worried, it's just that her kind of worry comes from a place of the future, a future of relationship. If Agono were to be lost, then the rest of her life would be the experience of that loss. Not that the loss would be any less of a hardship for Vorkos, but he has a different kind of love, and there are all sorts of different realms of roads of thought to go down with that. But I'm going to go ahead and move on. You know my predicament better than any of the few I have told, said she. A bold soul she was, and she felt comfortable enough in the presence of Agono's father to speak plainly. forgetting for a time that he was even a keeper. He waits my day of promising respectfully, and beyond that he seeks to prove in any way he can that he is worthy. I think he wanted to embrace the challenge of this trial in my honor, and not just to his house. But I have not and never would ask for him to go. I know him, and your son is a good man, a true son of Dendium, with a bold and just heart. He does not need to prove himself to me. So, Agono, apparently she is implying here that Agono doesn't necessarily do this trial. He's not doing this trial for the honor and the respect of the people of Dendium, or to become the keeper of war. He's doing this because he cares about her. He knows that he needs to apparently do something that puts him a cut above the rest. And obviously, as the context has implied, there is a bit of a problem with, she says, she refers to a predicament. And he's doing this for her honor. So perhaps Agono is trying to do something that will make him worthy of something, as we will find out. So, moving on. Bovrokos turned away and leaned heavily upon the parapet. It is his duty. So Bovrokos is clearly upset. Like, this thing she's referencing is something that he would prefer that it not be a problem, but he knows that there's just it's a problem that exists, and the fact that his son is doing this not necessarily for the honor of the house or to become worthy of the seat of war is something that it does bother him, but there's supposed to be some mystery here. She said nothing, but stepped closer to the edge and rested her head upon her slender arms. The sounds of celebration for the new year put sadness on her face. My grandfather will never let me be with him, will he? I see an anger in his eyes when Agono is made mention of, and I know better than to ask. Now, before I go any further, there was another issue with a beta reader. And this beta reader pointed out that some of the family positions don't make sense. Some people weren't even born yet for certain things to happen. And this was just an oversight when writing. I wanted certain people to have certain types of relationships, and at the same time I didn't want certain people to be so different in age from other people for narrative purposes. So what I've ended up doing here as just a mental edit going into this is that her grandfather is now going to become her father. In the original idea of this, even though it is not referenced anywhere in the book, and the original idea was that her father had died, and that the grandfather was now, he had always been the patriarch of the house and the keeper of the seat that he holds. Which, I guess is a spoiler. He is a keeper. And she is a keeper's granddaughter. But I'm going to be changing him to be her father. It was the easiest solution. My father will never let me be with him, will he? Now, that sort of sentence can be confusing. Obviously, with context, it is understood. She's referring to Agono when she says him. But it might be better to actually just say Agono. Otherwise, one might think that she is referring to her grandfather. I see an anger in his eyes when Agono is made mention of, and I know better than to ask. Now, there's an issue, apparently, between Agono and Ryland's father. So, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you for watching. I will be picking up exactly where I left off for the next video. If you liked what you heard here, please feel free to subscribe, and I will be making